Welcome to The Homeless Conservative. I'm your host, Blake Fisher. Today I'm joined by nobody because I didn't book a guest for this week. I was on vacation last week and I didn't get around to it. And plus, I wanted to talk about Congress, specifically the House of Representatives, and their just lack of ability to pick a new speaker after firing Kevin McCarthy from the post a few weeks ago. And I've gotten a couple questions about that, and I thought I'll try to make it make as much sense to you as possible if you're not into following the blow-by-blow, play-by-play of the current race to become the Speaker of the House. Like the worst job in the country, maybe. So that's what we're going to talk about. So thanks for joining me. Appreciate that you're here, and be sure to like, subscribe, all that kind of fun stuff. If you would, tell a friend about it if you think they'd like it. If you think it would help, that really actually helps me the most. Probably is tell a friend that you think would enjoy it about it. I think that helps me. So let's talk about the speakership. So let's talk just like the brief. Super brief overview of what's going on in case you do not know. So a few weeks ago, Kevin McCarthy, who's the Speaker of the House, a Republican, was ousted from the position by a small gang of Republicans. Literally 8 of them got rid of him. And so that's just how it works. I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. And since then, we've had no House leadership. So there is no Speaker of the House, which means nothing is going to get done in the House of Representatives. You've probably also noticed or heard in the meantime that, terrorists attacked Israel and there's more Ukraine funding coming. There's all sorts of things that Congress needs to be involved in, but the House of Representatives cannot be because there is no Speaker of the House. Let's get into the details of why this happened, starting with sort of the history of some of the Speaker of the House and the House of Representatives. So the Constitution has very little in the way of saying what the speaker's job actually is. It says that it actually does not specify that it has to be a member of Congress. And so that's why you've probably heard some people floating names of people that are not currently in Congress, like Donald Trump, to be the Speaker of the House, which I think would be hilarious to see because it's not an easy job and it requires, compromise and working with different people. And I just think that would be a hilarious thing to see Donald Trump try to do. But so it doesn't have to be a congressperson, but it always has been. A couple other things to note is that it never happens that Democrats vote for a Republican or Republicans vote for a Democrat, or we could go back and talk about other parties. But for right now, we're just talking Republicans and Democrats since they've been the two parties in power for, almost over 150 years. And so it's never happened. It's just they don't cross the aisle to vote for the other person. So what generally happens is that you get a Speaker of the House where, the entire Republican conference would get behind someone like Paul Ryan, for example, or John Boehner, or the entire Democratic caucus would get around Nancy Pelosi, and they'd all vote for them. If they've got the majority, if everyone votes, they win. It doesn't matter that Republicans don't. They'll generally have there's a minority leader too, and generally the other party will just vote for the minority leader. And so what that forces you to do is you have to have a consensus among your entire party that of the people in the House of Representatives. You have to get all of them on board, or at least enough of them, not all of them, but you have to get enough of them to get 200. You have to have a majority. Not a majority. You have to have 50% plus one to become Speaker of the House. You can't have, for example, 3 people get votes. If none of them get 50% plus one, they don't become the Speaker of the House. And that's what's been happening over the last few weeks is that when things come to a vote, the House Minority Leader, Jeffries, would get all the Democratic votes. And then Jim Jordan was running. He would get most of the Republicans. But the problem is Republicans only have a 4-seat majority in the House of Representatives right now, which means they only have 4 votes to lose to be able to elect as Speaker of the House from their conference. So going back, this is actually not the most contentious speaker race. There was actually one in the 1800s it was actually the first Republican one in 1860, I think. It took 144 rounds of voting, which makes Kevin McCarthy's 15 from this last year seem quaint. And so, there have been these battles in the past. This is not the first one. It's not the worst one. But there is an alarming degree of what seems to be we'll never figure out. And it just seems like it's very chaotic, and it seems like it's also at a really bad time. So to get into a little bit of the history of it, so the Speaker of the House, like I mentioned, doesn't have to be from the House of Representatives, but it always has been. And what they used to do is preside over the Congress. And so they would do things like call on who's going to speak in the House when people are debating. They would do things like assign committee chairs and committee members, and legislation used to be written. I know this is going to sound crazy. It used to be written by the legislators, and then it would maybe die in committee, or it would bubble up and get past committee and then get to the floor, and then they debate it, and then there'd be a floor vote. And that's, I don't know if you remember Schoolhouse Rock from when we were children, but none of that happens anymore. That is not how bills get passed. What happens now, the speakership has largely become, it's the top-down power. So leadership decides what's going to be made into law and just like sends it down to the little people in the House and says, here's how you vote for it. And that's how we're passing budgets. We're doing all these omnibus bills. We're missing deadlines. We haven't passed a budget on time, I think, since 2005. I think that's right. I'll have to fact check myself on that. But it's just gotten ridiculous. So without a speaker now, it's even worse than it used to be, because all of the decisions, the way we've structured the House of Representatives, it's all coming from leadership. I don't think that's a good structure. I think that is not how Congress was supposed to be, but that's where we're at. There's a really good article, if you're interested in reading it, Representative Mike Gallagher, who was elected in 2016 in, I think, Wisconsin. I think that's where he's from. I should know this, but anyway, he was pretty fresh. He was a freshman when he wrote an article for The Atlantic. It's called How to Salvage Congress, because he got there and was just very disillusioned with what he found. I think he thought, like the rest of us, that Congress is broken. If you look at the polls, something like 11% think Congress is working well, and the rest of the country does not. And so he felt the same way, and he thought it was probably just like the politicians. It was a people problem. And what he found, that it wasn't a people problem, it was a structure of Congress. He has a couple of quotes that I've got to read. Sorry about the length of them, but I feel like they're important things to understand about how the House works. He says, I suspect the framers would also be distressed to learn that power has shifted even more dramatically, if out of public view, within the House of Representatives. Starting in the 1970s and accelerating in the 1990s, what power remains within the institution has shifted from members and committees to House leadership. In 1975, the Democrats gave the Steering and Policy Committee the authority to assign House members to specific committees, and they gave the House Speaker a mandate to select both the chair and the members of the Rules Committee. When the Republicans gained the House majority in 1994, they continued the transfer of power from committees to House leadership by limiting the terms of committee chairmen, who had previously been able to serve unlimited terms, to 6 years, and by limiting it to 6 years, and by allowing the Speaker to disregard seniority in appointing committee chairmen. Combined with other parliamentary power moves that create end runs around the committee process, this trend has continued in the intervening years. The result is that power in the House has become highly concentrated at the top. Leadership determines which bills come to the floor for a vote. Leadership chooses loyal committee chairs so as to ensure that bills opposed by a special interest will be killed in committee. And in the event that problematic amendments do make it to the House floor, the Rules Committee, an organ of the Speaker, kills them off. The legislation that does pass tends to come in last-second omnibus bills that legislators have no chance to read, let alone debate and amend. The dirty secret is that many House members like this arrangement because it prevents them from having to cast tough votes. So what we've got is a Congress, a House of Representatives, and Congress in general, although the Senate's done less of this, that have kind of abdicated their power to the executive branch and to the bureaucracy because they're more interested in keeping their butt in the seat and getting reelected. And this used to be about losing to the other side, but now it's about getting primaried. So all the Republicans that are nervous to cross like Donald Trump or to not be loyal enough to him, what they're worried about is getting primaried at the next cycle. And so, because, you know, in the House of Representatives, every 2 years, you're just constantly running for re-election. So what used to be about, oh, this person's good as the head of the Ways and Means Commission or committee. They're good at it. They had unlimited terms. They could be there. They could gain a lot of power as the head of that committee. And we decided we didn't like that because we wanted to concentrate power at the top for some reason, which I think is always a bad idea. We literally set up our entire system of government to not do that. We don't want concentrated power. And yet, we as voters and Congress have allowed it to happen because it's easier. Because you don't have to then vote on something that might upset your base a little bit. Most laws are going to be some sort of compromise. Rarely does anyone have a majority that's big enough where they can just pass whatever they want, because even when that happens, there's disagreements within the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and that's what we're seeing right now. And so I think that basically because of that slow, from the 70s to the 90s to now, all of the power has rested at the top, and all the leadership does is command people what to do, and then the other members are fine with it. So there's 435 members of Congress, and we're basically putting all the power in about 3 or 4 people at the top. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but that is where we're at. And so it's even harder now to not have a speaker because we don't have the structure, the rules committee, and all this kind of stuff that they do change. I think one common misconception about Congress is that all of the rules of Congress are like written down in the Constitution. Most of them are not. The rules are created by the organizations and they evolve over time. I'm sure you heard about the Senate and the filibuster. You hear about that all the time. We can do a whole nother podcast on that. But so these rules tend to change to make it easier for people to get reelected. That's really what it's all about. But what's interesting is that I think I don't want to call it a misconception, just something I hear all the time, is that this is all about power. Yes, in some cases, but not really, because what power do the members of the House of Representatives have if they're not in leadership? You just have to drudge along to get to leadership. Really, the only way to get high up, the way to get committee chairs or to get into leadership is to be an amazing fundraiser. So that's the other problem we've got with Congress right now. Guess who are the amazing fundraisers? It's the names you hear all the time. It's AOC, it's Matt Gaetz, it's Marjorie Taylor Greene, it's Lauren Boebert, it's Jim Jordan, it's Kevin McCarthy. I know I just labeled more Republicans than Democrats because I don't pay as much attention to Democrats, but basically the way to get power is to get money for the parties. And so if you're a good fundraiser, you are going to be able to get those positions better. It's not about who's good at it. It's not about who has the right knowledge base for that committee. It is about who is raising money, who's our rock stars. And generally now, to be a rock star, it does not behoove you to talk about policy, and it does not benefit you to compromise in any way whatsoever. So all those names I mentioned, you probably have noticed that they are the furthest right and the furthest left, and they tend to be the troublemakers. They're also the people that are on TV constantly, and they're the people that are fear-mongering constantly too. Because do you know what sells? Is fear. So if they can say the Democrats are going to steal babies and I don't know, whatever they're going to say, that will get them fundraising money, that will get them power. So we've just got a really perverse incentive structure throughout the House of Representatives. That's sort of a side rant about the structure of the House. So let's talk a little bit about the Speaker in general, and to give you the brief history of what actually happened. So that's kind of what used to happen. And like I said, in the 90s, sort of 70s, and the 90s, and then now it's just totally discombobulated. But Republicans have had a history of having problems with speakers in the last 20 years, I would say. So John Boehner was a speaker. He kind of ran out and retired. Paul Ryan was the speaker when Trump was elected. He didn't really want to do it. He kind of got convinced to do it. He didn't know for sure. And sure enough, he kind of ran out too. And now all you hear is about Paul Ryan being a rhino, and he was a terrible Republican. And basically Trump just attacks everything that came before him in the world of Republican politics or conservative politics. He thinks he was the alpha at the beginning of Republican politics, which is just silly. It's not true, but he's literally bashed on almost everyone that ever came before him, including George W. Bush, including George Bush, including Reagan, including every Speaker of the House, anyone that's had any kind of power, he has knocked on and called a rhino or a squish or a globalist, whatever that means. And, so we've not had a great run, whereas the Democrats have, I don't know if you know Nancy Pelosi. She's been their speaker for until she left after they lost in 2020. She was the speaker. She had 2 different stints as speaker, and but they had slim majorities too, and they managed to pick a speaker. And it's because I think that she has some legitimate leadership skills. I do not agree with Nancy Pelosi, but I think that sometimes she was a better leader for her party than Republicans have had, honestly. It's not that I think Paul Ryan was bad. I think that there's more mischief in the Republican Party, in the Freedom Caucus, and in the far right wings of the Republican Party than there are in the far left. We hear about the squad all the time, AOC and Tlaib and Ilham Omar, but they don't have a lot of sway. AOC fundraises a lot, but the other ones don't do as much. And so they've managed to kind of keep them at bay, and they're not really able to steer the entire party one way or another, whereas the small minority on the right is doing that with the Republicans. And so we get to just the other history is that, so Democrats controlled the House, and in 2016 they lost. And so when Trump won the presidency, Republicans also took the Senate and the House at the same time. So he had the House, the Senate, and the White House all were Republican for 2 years. And then in 2018, lost the House and the Senate. And so Democrats had it for a few years. And then in 2022, Republicans got it, but they did not get the House back. With generally what happens is the president's elected, and then 2 years later, you see a switch in Congress. So if a Democrat gets elected, for example, in 2020, normally you'd expect in 2022 to see a red wave of sorts. And generally it's just historic. It doesn't really matter what the president does or doesn't accomplish in those first 2 years. The one exception, I think, in my lifetime is George W. Bush is elected in 2000, and in 2002 keeps the House because 9/11 has more to do with that than probably anything else. And so it doesn't happen very often. And so what was supposed to be this huge red wave ends up with Republicans only having a 4-seat majority. And there were people in those 4 seats that have on the record said they were praying that would be the case so that they would have more power and sway to force the Republican Party to do what they want to do. That sounds selfish to me and weird and gross. It doesn't feel like something that is like a serious thing that an adult would say that wants to go there and legislate. And so we have this 4-seat majority. So Kevin McCarthy, of course, has wanted to be Speaker of the House for, I guess, his entire life. I don't think he maybe has had any other ambitions, and it shows. I mean, he's a very, like, if you had to draw the picture of a Washington, of the swamp that is talked about all the time by Donald Trump, Kevin McCarthy fits that image to me, because he will change anything to pursue power. He will say anything to please the people that he's talking to at the time, including, and I think the most egregious example of this is that, Donald Trump loses the election in 2020. For sure, there was no stolen election. He loses. There's all this talk about the stolen election stuff, and then January 6th happens, and there's literally a conference call. It was leaked by someone with leadership, which was him, Liz Cheney, Steve Scalise. I think there was maybe one other person on the call, and someone recorded it and released it to the press. But he claimed that he was always on Trump's side, but this audio recording comes out of him basically saying he was super mad at Trump, and he was going to try to call and convince him to resign after January 6th had happened. That was his plan of action. When that came out, obviously Trump was furious for obvious reasons. But I mean, keep in mind, these people attacked the Capitol, and I'm sure that the people inside were fearing for their lives, which makes sense. There were people outside yelling, "Hang Mike Pence." And I truly believe I don't think everyone in that crowd was like this. I think there were certain people inside of that crowd, like the Proud Boys and some of these other people that were there specifically to instigate and to break into the Capitol. And I think if they could have gotten a hold of Mike Pence or Democrats like Nancy Pelosi, I think that it could have been really, really bad. It was already really bad, but it could have been worse. And so anyway, right after that, he basically goes groveling back to Trump, goes to Mar-a-Lago, flies out there, and just begs for Trump's forgiveness, because he knows he can't become the Speaker of the House without Trump's blessing. He knows it's not possible now, because they've got a very slim majority, and all Trump has to do is say Kevin McCarthy is a fraud and a rhino and a globalist squish, and done. He will never be Speaker of the House at that point. So he goes groveling back to Trump, gets in Trump's good graces, tries to block the January 6th committee from even happening, which to me is crazy because no matter what you think about January 6th, it deserves an investigation to know, how did we not see that this was going to happen and prevent it from happening? How did our own nation's capital get attacked by people within our nation? It doesn't make any sense. And so to me, if nothing else, there deserves to be a commission to say, where did the government go wrong with this? Where did Capitol Police fail? Where did the president fail? Where did Congress fail? We need some sort of way to prevent this from happening again. And he tried to block the entire committee from happening because he thought it'd be politicized, even though he had opportunity to put Republicans on it and refused to. Finally, he ended up putting like Jim Jordan on it. I mean, it was a ridiculous farce. I do not like Kevin McCarthy, but when it came time to be Speaker of the House in 2023, he tried to make all sorts of compromises with people. And he's pretty good at this. He's pretty good at deal making. I will give him that. And he got, even though it took 15 rounds, he eventually got the speaker job. Part of one of the things that he conceded in that was Matt Gaetz and some of those crew wanted to be able to recall him, essentially, to basically, it's a motion to vacate. I'm not going to get into the legal crap or whatever of the Senate, of the House rules, but they wanted there to be a one single member to be able to call for a motion to vacate, which would trigger a vote on the floor where, everyone would vote and say, should we keep him? Should we get rid of him? And keep in mind, what that means is that one member of the Republican caucus in the House could say, I want to take this to a floor vote. They've got 221 members, and Democrats have, like I said, 4 fewer. So the Democrats have 217. And all you have to do, the Democrats are obviously going to vote every time, probably to vacate or whatever. I mean, this has never happened before, so we don't know for sure, but you're basically counting on not keeping Democrats, I would think. So you've got to make sure you can keep you can only lose 4 votes. That's all you can lose on the Republican side, or unless some people vote present or don't vote on the Democrat side. So they go to vote, and 8 Republicans vote to oust him, and that is enough to combine with the Democrats for Kevin McCarthy to be out of his job. Matt Gaetz led this whole thing. Matt Gaetz is not a serious person. He does not even have a legislative staff. He doesn't have anyone that writes laws for him. He just has a comm staff. That means he just is only interested in getting in front of cameras and talking and doing interviews. Matt Gaetz is only for himself. He does not care about Congress. He doesn't care about any of this. Now, I'll say this. If you look at the interviews of Matt Gaetz right after this happened, he says a lot of things that I totally agree with. He says that the way Congress, all the stuff I just talked about, the way Congress is working is broken. There's not enough power in committees. Committee chairs need to be nominated different ways. There needs to be more, it needs to bubble up from the bottom up. I agree with all of that, but I don't think he really feels that way. Because if that is really how he felt, he would no longer be the person in Congress that he is, because he would have to come up with legislation. He would have to vote on things that were potentially unpopular. He couldn't run this. There's sort of this weird purity test going on in the far right of the Republican Party, where it's like it's better to have the right principles. And by principles, they just mean loyalty to Trump. There's really no other guiding principle there. And if you ever compromise or ever back down from that in any way, so if you work with Democrats or you vote with Democrats or any kind of thing like that, or even just vote with the middle of your party, you are no longer, losing is a badge of honor for them, because it proves that they were pure, and they would rather lose than win, honestly. I mean, that's the truth. And so with no real plan of anyone to replace him, and with no real plan on what to do, they oust the Speaker of the House. And this is, by the way, because Matt Gaetz is mad because Kevin McCarthy had to work with Democrats to pass a continuing resolution for the budget, because we are heading towards a government shutdown because Congress can't do their freaking jobs and pass a budget. And Kevin McCarthy brought several bills, tried to get it to work within the conference, because keep in mind, in the House, you just need a majority. So all he has to do is get, all but 3 of the Republicans in the House to agree on something, and he can't do it. He tried to work with Republicans over and over and over again, and they kept rejecting everything. So finally he said, you know what, I'm going to work with Democrats then, because I can get some Democrats to agree on some stuff. And so they agreed to some funding for Ukraine and some other things. And there you go. There's the deal. And so Matt Gaetz was pissed off that Kevin McCarthy would dare work with Democrats instead of working with Republicans only. And he claimed that Republicans need to unite. Well, he then worked with Democrats to oust McCarthy because there were only 8 Republicans that voted to get rid of McCarthy. So now you've got only 8. So, this loyalty to the Republican Party it just depends on the circumstance, because in this circumstance where it benefits Matt Gaetz, forget loyalty to the party. Let's work with Democrats to oust McCarthy, even though you're ousting him for working with Democrats. It's so, there's always hypocrisy in politics. I feel like all we talk about is whataboutism, where it's like, well, this guy does this, well, your guy did that too, or whatever. This was so immediate that I can't believe that people take it seriously. The hypocrisy of being like, you work with Democrats, you're gone, and then work with Democrats to get rid of them. It just seems strange to me. So that's where we're at. We end up with no speaker, and then we get into this race of trying to figure out who's going to replace Kevin McCarthy. The thing is, Kevin McCarthy had been a deal maker for a while. He'd been in leadership and stuff, but not the speaker. And so, he's made deals with people and stuff. And so it made some sense. I mean, some people still didn't think he would get it, but he finally got it. And it was really hard for Kevin McCarthy to get it. Well, all of a sudden you've got these other people. So Steve Scalise, who's basically third in leadership, puts his hat in the ring. He can't get the votes in Republican conference. So let's talk about how that works. So what happens is that the Republicans decide within basically in a closed door secret ballot, they start voting for people. And so people will put themselves in for nominations. So this starts with a wide pool. And what they've been doing is let's say there's I'm recording this on Tuesday night. As of Tuesday morning, there were 7 people still in the speaker's race internally in the Republican Party, and they were doing secret ballots all morning. So what they do is say, okay, everyone vote. Whoever gets the least votes, you're gone. Now they have 6. Okay, vote for who do you want from these 6? They dropped the 1. And they ended up with 2, and then they ended up with Tom Emmer from Minnesota, who I think would have been good. I think by good, I don't really know anything about him, as far as how he would be the speaker, but he has one thing going for him for me, is that he voted on January 6th to certify the election, which was the right thing to do because there was no evidence that it was stolen. There was no evidence that Donald Trump won. This was just Republicans falling in line to what Trump wanted them to do so that they could get reelected. And this kind of brings up a really important part that I think that Nick Cottagio, aka Alla Pundit, who's at the Dispatch now, he had a great part about this, kind of talking about what these Republicans do, that they do the wrong thing because they think that they're better than the alternative of the person on the far right that would primary them and then maybe win their seat, especially if they're in a safe red district. So he calls this, he says, for years, I've imagined most Republicans in Washington as being afflicted with what I call Marco Rubio syndrome, named in honor of the candidate in 2016 who saw most clearly what Trump's ascent portended for the party and who ended up accommodating him anyway. Marco Rubio syndrome is when a conscientious politician talks themselves into believing that they're behaving morally, not just expediently, but morally, by cooperating with the worst influences in right-wing politics. The logic is this: if I don't go along, I'll be replaced by someone who's truly terrible. It's a transparently self-serving rationalization for collaborating with illiberalism among those who know better. 9 times out of 10, it leads the afflicted person to vote the same way as the hypothetical populist gargoyle whom he fears would replace him in office, erasing the alleged moral distinction between the two. But on the 10th time out of 10, there really is a difference, which makes condemning Marco Rubio syndrome tricky. And I do agree with this. There's this thing that happened with Trump where he gets elected, and I think a lot of people thought, he makes me a little nervous, but maybe with the right people around him, he could get the job done. And to Trump's credit, he hired some great people in that first administration. I don't agree with everything they do, but they were serious people. They were career, they had careers in the things that they were doing. So, good generals. We had, like John Bolton, really national, as far as like national security and that kind of stuff. There's a lot of people that were really good, but he ended up firing or getting rid of all those people. And there's a good argument on the right of whether that was the right or wrong thing to do, to say, should the adults stepped up and tried to be like, well, it's better that I'm there than someone worse than me? Or there are other people that think it would have been better if we just let that train derail more quickly. I could be convinced either way, honestly. I think that that's a really good discussion to have. Is it better to enable these fringes by sometimes going along with them? It makes them seem more legit, but I think if we just put these people in power, we would see that it would be a nightmare and a train wreck. I mean, I think the problem is that some people are concerned it would be like the end of America. I think that's a little bit dramatic, but not totally. When you've got Trump saying he would suspend the Constitution, that's not theory. That is him saying that's what he wanted to do and reinstate himself as the president. That's not something that you could do constitutionally. So I think that is really scary stuff. But so basically, most of these people in Congress have just gone along with Trump because they have to appease the base, or they're going to get primaried. They want to stay in that seat, and they can't. And so you've also got a lot of Republicans in districts where Trump didn't win. Biden maybe won handily. There's like 6 in New York, for example, that are potentially going to be losable in 2024. And so those people need to vote a different way. They can't go along with Trump all the time, or they'll definitely lose their seat. And not just to someone else in the party, they'll lose it to a Democrat. So what all this ends up being is just a total mess that is, you're never going to get all 221 Republicans to agree on a person, because there's a small fraction that are so Trump loyalists that they won't pick anyone that's not one of their people. So Jim Jordan was one of their people. He went through 3 votes. So Scalise drops out because he realizes he's not going to be able to get enough conference votes even. Jim Jordan gets the conference votes, but they take it to the floor, and then he loses in 3 rounds, and he's losing people in every round because the moderates have finally said, absolutely not. We're not letting Jim Jordan run this place. He would run it into the ground. And they're probably right. Part of me wonders if that's the right move, though. Like, force the person that says that you can never compromise. You're going to have to when you're the Speaker of the House. You have to make deals. You have to work with people. What would that be like? Would Trump turn on him? Because there's no way to please Trump in that situation, because the only thing that pleases Trump is blind loyalty to him and agreeing with anything he says, even if he said the opposite thing 10 minutes before. And that's an impossible standard to be held to if you're the Speaker of the House. It's easy when you're just some guy in the House, because you just only vote on the things you're supposed to vote. You don't vote on the other things, and you don't care what happens, because if you're in a safe red district, you're not going to get primaried, and you're not going to lose your election. And so there's basically just no way that you're going to get 217 people to vote for someone on the floor, because Democrats aren't going to cross the aisle to help save your floundering party. And so that's where we're at. So Jim Jordan fails. We get a new crop of 7 people. Like I said this morning, there were 7. It whittled down to Tom Emmer's. And then literally, I was going to record this earlier. I tried to start recording. I had some technical difficulties, stopped. Glad I did, because I pulled out my phone and he was already out, because immediately, literally, it was within an hour of him being, he won, and it's going to go to a floor vote soon, or he's going to, he's got to work on he still had a couple dozen people he was going to have to convince to vote for him. But then Trump came out and said he'd be terrible. He's a globalist. He's a rhino. And by the way, if you look at a map, I'll put it on the screen if you're watching, and I'll put it in the show notes of mapping like where, conservative versus like less or more conservative fiscally and in other ways. Tom Emmer's he was more conservative on other issues than Jim Jordan, but less fiscally responsible. But to pretend that Trump or any of the Republicans care about fiscal responsibility at this point, when we're $33 trillion in debt, is silly. And so, what this all boils down to is that guy he voted to certify the January 6th, the election on January 6th, and didn't vote to say that Biden stole it somehow. That's what this all boils down to. Again, it's just about loyalty to Trump. So that's why he's gone. And now we're going to start this whole process over again. And the names now that are in the crew, and keep in mind, this just came down within the last hour or two. So I don't know much about most of these people, because I do not keep track. I do not keep track of everyone in Congress. But there's basically 6 people now. So we're back to 6. It's Mike Johnson from Louisiana, Kevin Hern from Oklahoma, Chuck Fleischman from Tennessee, Byron Donalds from Florida, Mark Green from Tennessee, Roger Williams from Texas. Good news, bad news. All 6 of those people did not vote to certify the election on January 6, 2021. I think that disqualifies them from being the Speaker. I think if you can't answer the question, Did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election? And you can't say yes or no to it, which, by the way, that was a problem. Scalise and Jim Jordan, neither one would answer that question. They just skipped around it. They would not answer it. There's only one right answer to that question. And honestly, even if you believe that it was stolen, then say no. I do not trust people that made that vote. I think it was dangerous. I think it added credibility to a narrative that was completely false. Trump lost every case to deal with the election. He did not get it stolen. He just lost the election. And it was a close election, but he lost it by the same margin as far as electoral college votes as he won in 2016. So they were both tight elections, and Donald Trump lost, and Donald Trump mostly lost because he told people not to do mail-in voting. That's really what it boils down to, is that the perception that mail-in voting was good for Democrats and bad for Republicans is a myth. It's not true. I don't know if you've noticed this, but most Republican voters are super old. Guess what is convenient for them? Voting by mail. And he told them not to do it. And I'm confident there were a bunch of them that either couldn't get out to vote or didn't get out to vote or whatever, because Donald Trump told them not to trust mail-in voting. And they believed him. So I don't know how you fix that. Anyway, this loyalty test I think is silly, but all 6 of these people now that are running did not vote to certify the election. I think that means they're not going to be able to get the moderates. I think that a lot of the people I read and pay attention to, they all say when they talk to people in private in Congress, they say, we'd love to be rid of Donald Trump. Of course, I don't believe he won the election. But publicly, they have to be more careful. They either have to say nothing or they have to lie and pretend that they think there was something shady going on. And so I don't see how any of these people are going to be able to get the votes from the bulk of the Republican Party. They're going to get it from the fringes maybe, but they're not going to be able to get it from the bulk. So I don't know how this nominating process is going to go. It actually might be happening right now, as far as I know. Like I said, it's Tuesday night right now. This will release on Wednesday though, so maybe we'll have more information, so I'm not going to get too much further into what's happening right now because it'll probably be wrong and outdated. I just don't see a way forward. I don't see how the Republican, I've read a lot. I can't find anyone that says there's a real obvious answer to this question. I mean, they're maybe going to have to work with Democrats, but there's so far been at least one Democrat that's come out and said, of course, this was when it was Tom Emmer's. He basically said, I would not vote, which basically means that's one less Republican vote they have to get if a Democrat doesn't vote or votes present, I guess. And he was basically saying, I would not vote if he'll make certain concessions, and it was around funding and budgets and things like that. So someone either is going to have to make those concessions to Democrats to get them to vote for them, or it's going to maybe not be a Republican. Like maybe they do need to pick someone from outside the House. That might be a solution here. The other solution that's been floated around is to take the current kind of standing pro tem. There's a rule in the House. I don't totally understand this, and some people have said maybe it's not even constitutional, but there's basically a rule that says if for some reason the speaker's if the speaker is vacated by either death or, in this case, in the first case ever in our history, just ousted like Kevin McCarthy was, you have to have someone in that position that can actually do some of the business of the House. And there's someone in there right now that's basically they're the president pro tem or something like that. I'm going to misname that, but anyway, that person they've talked about just like, hey, could we just vote to have him be a stand-in for the next 6 months or something and get us through? Because keep in mind that continuing resolution that we passed last month, we're coming up on that in a couple weeks where they're going to have to pass a budget or we're going to have a government shutdown. We've got Hamas has attacked Israel in the meantime, and Israel is asking for funding. And so far, we can't really do that. So the Senate has taken up some of that. And they're going to try to pass it there and then kick it back to the House if the House ever has leadership and can do this. But Congress has the power of the purse. Even though they've given up a lot of that power, we can't give money to Ukraine. We can't give money to Israel. We can't pass a budget. We can't stop the government from shutting down without Congress working. And so this couldn't happen at a worse time. I think it shows how fractured the Republican Party is, specifically in the House of Representatives, but really as a whole, we've got too many factions that will not work with each other. And Republicans used to be about different factions that could find things in common and were willing to lay down the things that they disagreed with. They'd still argue about them a lot and fight for them, but they found common interest and common goals that they were like, hey, we can be a coalition. That is gone. There is no coalition anymore because there are no principles or policies. If you can define for me, so I see all the time in my comments on Instagram and YouTube, anytime I say something about anything Trump or any Republican that I don't like, I'm called a rhino, which is hilarious. Republican in name only, which, to be fair, might be true at this point because I consider myself a conservative. I just happen to be Republican because Republicans are the more conservative party out of the two. But more and more, the Republican Party is not aligned with my policy and principles. Like, for example, I think the debt is a humongous problem. And it's a problem that specifically Congress has to solve. They're the only body that is allowed to. And neither do the Democrats or the Republicans care about deficits. We've got both Trump and Biden saying they would not touch entitlements. And entitlements are 70% of that budget problem. It's on autopilot. We have to spend that money every year. And it gets more and more, and especially with inflation now. And so this is a huge problem, and no one seems to care about it. Take any issue, take abortion. You've got Donald Trump calling out pro-lifers now. So how long do you think the Republican Party is going to hold together on that even? Because you've already got, if people follow him, Israel, same thing. Republican Party has traditionally been more supportive of Israel than the Democratic Party. That's cracking because Donald Trump is, the day of the attacks is coming out and saying Hezbollah is smart and dogging on Netanyahu for no reason other than he wasn't loyal enough to Trump. And so I think you'll start to see fractures on the things that have been bedrocks of Republican politics: Israel, abortion, picket, fiscal responsibility, trade policies. That's already totally flipped. Donald Trump, we used to be free trade, and now we're protectionist. And I just see more and more that I don't have anything in common with that wing of the party. And that wing of the party right now is in Congress, I feel like is small enough that they're just, and because if you have a larger majority, you don't have to pay attention to those people. If you have a 60-seat majority, 4 people you can just ignore. But you can't ignore those 4 people when you've got a 4-seat majority. And I think the problem is, Nick Cottagio, again, at the Dispatch, puts it this way. His analogy for this is that this whole thing is a hostage situation. And essentially, let me see if I can find that, actually. I think I put that in my notes. Let's see. I don't have the exact quote from him, so I'll summarize. But essentially, what the problem is the Trump far right wing of the party has decided they're okay with losing. They're okay with Democrats winning because that means they fight. I guess it's just kind of a weird thing, and so they care more about Trump than the party. They do not actually have any. So all this talk of like, be loyal, we should work with Republicans, we should unite. It's all BS because they are not really for that if Trump's not. And so they don't really care about the party at all. If they cared about the party, if Trump cared about the party, he wouldn't have told people to not vote in the Georgia election after he lost in 2020. And maybe Republicans could have held the Senate and stopped some of Biden's agenda, but they didn't. And so Biden had the House, the Senate, and that for 2 years. If you care about principles, if you care about policies, if you really think the Democrats are a threat, and I think they are, I think the Democrats are just this much less loony than the Republicans are. I'm holding my fingers very close together if you're not watching this. But they're just slightly more put together than the Republicans. And so they seem kind of like adults, but I do not want them to be in power. I think that they have really dangerous ideas. I think that they would exacerbate our problems. I think that I think their climate policy is just atrocious financially, and it picks winners and losers that I think are detrimental to our entire economy. I think that they have really, really bad ideas, and I want to keep them out of power. But Republicans, if they continue to choose to not govern, they're going to get voted out. People are sick of this stuff. 67% polled said they need to pick a speaker fast. Like, the stuff that's going on in the world is serious. The longer this draws out and the more it looks like a circus, I know we're a year away from the elections, but I think that it will leave a lingering impression on people that Republicans can't govern. And I don't think they're wrong if they have that impression right now. I don't see any evidence that they can, at least in the House of Representatives. I think the Senate is a little better. And, but, we're just seeing all this kind of stuff. And so it's a hostage situation. And until there are enough Republicans that say, fine, shoot the hostage, we're going to keep doing this mess. I mean, I think that in 2016, we had a chance to say, all right, Trump, we should not allow Trump. We've got to draw lines in the sand and say, we don't want people like this in our party. We didn't do it. He became president. And then we said, okay, well, let's see how this goes. By 2018, I mean, look at all the stuff and just all the things that he did that were terrible. And everyone had to, and look, I'm going to give him credit where credit's due. I think he did some good things. I think some of his Middle East policy was better than Biden's for sure. I think that you've got the Abraham Accords, you've got the killing of Soleimani in Iran, or not in Iran. It was in Iraq, but he had some good foreign policy stuff, mostly because he delegated it to smart people, and I think he did that well. But it doesn't make up for his blabbing about national security secrets, and his just kind of general bluster. And I think he's put us in more harm. He also spent a ton of money during COVID. People are pretending Biden is the only one to blame for the inflation that we're in. I think Trump had something to do with it too, although Trump had a better excuse than Biden because at least he was president when the pandemic actually happened. But, I don't think he was good. And in 2020, we had the chance to go, you know what, step too far. He tried to steal an election. We're done with him. They should have impeached and removed him. But the Senate had no balls and decided they couldn't do that. And so here we are again. Trump's running again. Could have gotten rid of him in 2020. We had another chance this past year in 2022 when everyone he picked but J.D. Vance lost their races. I mean, you put Dr. Oz up against a guy, Fetterman, who had a stroke and could barely talk at the time. And Pennsylvania said, well, we'd rather have the guy that can barely function, which is super sad. But that's how much they didn't like Dr. Oz. And I don't blame them. So all these Trump candidates lost. We should have said, you know what? He's a loser. He loses. He lost us the House and Senate in 2020 and the White House. Then he continued to lose in 2022. We made some gains in the House, but not a lot. We'd have a bigger majority if his Trumpy people hadn't ran. And we could get rid of him, but we won't. And I think until that happens, the Republican Party is going to be like this. I think if Trump is the nominee and this speaker thing goes on for too long, I think Republicans could lose for the next 8 years. I think they'll just keep losing if they keep this up. Democrats are also pretty terrible, like I said, and so don't put it past them to blow it when they get the chance to have power. They've done it kind of a lot. And we keep seeing this swing back. It keeps swinging back and forth. I don't know if you've noticed how much it goes all Democrats and then all Republicans. And then 2 years later, all Democrats. It just keeps going back and forth. I think as people give the other team a shot, that team sucks, they go for the other team next time. You look at the numbers from 2012 to 2016, and something like 8 million people or more, I mean, just by doing the math, voted for Barack Obama twice and then voted for Trump in 2016. That doesn't make any sense if you're voting on policy or principles or some sort of oh, here's how I think things should work. Because there's a lot of daylight between Barack Obama and Donald Trump. And I think it's because they were like, look, that guy promised change and it didn't come. And so I'm going to vote for the opposite of that. And then Trump got 4 years, and then I think it happened again. People were like, I'm sick of this guy. We're voting for change. The problem with 2024 at this point is that it's looking like it's not going to be changed. It's going to be a rematch of 2020. So it's hard to say how that goes because neither one are really changed. They've both been president. And so I don't know where we're heading, but I think that I don't see any way that this works out. I just don't see who's going to be able to be the speaker. I'm not very good at predicting stuff anyway. Who knows? By the time I release this, maybe we'll have a Speaker of the House. I doubt it, though. Anyway, so that's it about the Speaker of the House. I hope that helps a little bit. Thanks for listening. Tell a friend about it if you think they'd like it, and I'll catch you next time.